Britain's new Nightfall missile, a bargain bin tank killer that could change Ukraine's war. The United Kingdom has officially announced the development of a new tactical ballistic missile, codenamed Nightfall. Sounds like a James Bond movie. And is now floating the possibility of transferring it to Ukraine once the weapon is operational. Hey friends, Wes here, and Defense Secretary John Healey framed it as part of Britain's long-term commitment to Kyiv. Quote, "We will always try to respond to what Ukraine thinks it needs most." Translation? If Ukraine asks for a stick to beat Russia with, Britain is more than happy to provide the stick, and maybe even paint it in Ukrainian colors. This announcement comes at a time when European allies are desperate to lock in future deterrence. Russia is still trying to grind forward in the east, and Ukraine is straining to maintain a technological edge. The UK, already a pioneer in sending Storm Shadow cruise missiles, seems to have decided that cruise missiles are no longer spicy enough. The next step is a weapon that flies faster, hits harder, and is dirt cheap by modern missile standards. Meet the Nightfall, a missile with attitude. Nightfall will carry a warhead weighing in at 400 to 500 kilograms, roughly the same as a small car filled with TNT. The developers have promised a quasi-ballistic trajectory, which is a polite way of saying the missile will juke around in the terminal phase like a caffeinated squirrel, making life miserable for Russian air defense crews. Accuracy? Well, we're talking about a circular air probable of just 5 meters. In plain English, if the Russians park an S-400 battery in a field, Nightfall will not just hit the field, it will hit the radar van's left headlight. Its navigation suite is being built for the modern battlefield, which means it must survive in what engineers call a complex electromagnetic environment. That's jargon for Russian jamming. The missile's designers are promising a weapon that will keep its brain even when GPS is spoofed or jammed. Think of it as the anti-Shahed, where Russia's Iranian-made drones get confused by a stiff breeze. Nightfall will shrug off electronic warfare and keep coming. When you design a missile to survive inside Russia's defensive bubble, stealth is not a luxury, it's the price of admission. And the Nightfall program makes this clear by specifying a low multispectral signature as a requirement. That means the missile is engineered to slip through not just radar, but also infrared, optical, and even acoustic detection grids. In other words, if the Russians can see it, hear it, or feel it, the British want it to vanish. Russia has built its entire doctrine around layered air defenses, the so-called A2AD bubble, anti-access area denial, bristling with S-300s, S-400s, and now S-500s. In peacetime, this makes for impressive PowerPoint slides back in Moscow. In wartime, it means every missile that shines like a lighthouse on radar is going to get swatted down before it even clears Ukrainian airspace. But Nightfall's stealth shaping, heat-reducing coatings, and possibly radar-absorbent composites are all about cheating that system. The comparison here is not to something like the US Navy's big, brash Tomahawk cruise missile, which screams on radar like a flying pickup truck. It's closer in concept to a cut-rate stealth bomber packed into a single-use delivery system. The trick is to keep the costs down while still denying Russian operators a clean radar track. And at 500,000 pounds per shot, Nightfall is relatively cheap. But when you stack that against the billions Moscow poured into S-400 sites, it's a downright bargain. Stealth also buys something beyond survival. It buys doubt. If Russian radar crews can't trust what they see, they are forced to second-guess every blip on the screen. Was that a real missile? A decoy? A flock of birds? One of them newfangled mauled devices? The very act of uncertainty degrades response times and increases the chance of a leak in the shield. And when you're slipping a 500-kilogram warhead through that gap, hesitation is fatal for the defender. Now here's where Nightfall gets truly interesting. Each missile is projected to cost no more than 500,000 pounds, or about $675,000 US, not including the warhead or launch platform. Now that makes it an absolute bargain in the guided missile world. For comparison, a single Tomahawk cruise missile costs around $1.5 million, and ATACMS push well over $2 million per shot. In other words, Britain wants to put a discount aisle sticker on a weapon that can still blow a bridge apart. Production will emphasize speed over perfection. At least 5 prototypes are expected within the first 9 to 12 months, with a target production rate of 10 missiles per month, and scalability beyond that. This is a little bit less than building a technological marvel and more about creating a weapon that can be mass-produced without bankrupting the treasury. And for Ukraine, which needs volume as much as quality, this approach makes sense. Launch and scoot, one of the most underappreciated details in the Nightfall program, is not the missile itself, but the way it's supposed to be fired. The British Ministry of Defense made it clear that this weapon is designed for a shoot-and-scoot doctrine, where survival of the launcher is just as important as the missile hitting its target. The launcher will carry at least 2 missiles, and the requirement is that it can safely fire both within 15 minutes of arriving at a firing position. That timeline is not arbitrary. Russia has a proven track record of detecting Ukrainian artillery or missile batteries within minutes and then plastering the grid square with counter-battery fire or drones. To survive in this environment, speed is armor. Nightfall crews will roll into position, pop their missiles, and be back on the road before Russian reconnaissance drones can cue in a lancet or artillery strike. Even after firing, the plan insists that the launcher and the crew must vacate the area within 5 minutes. Again, this is not a suggestion. It is an engineering requirement. That speaks volumes about the UK's thinking here. In Ukraine, loitering is suicide. Any platform that sits still too long under Russian drone surveillance is essentially painting a target on its own back. By mandating a quick relocation, the system bakes battlefield reality into its design philosophy. This makes Nightfall fundamentally different from Cold War-era ballistic missile systems, which were often massive, slow, and dependent on elaborate infrastructure. Here, Britain is clearly designing a weapon that assumes it will be hunted relentlessly from the second it leaves cover. In practice, that means truck-mounted mobile launchers likely disguised as civilian haulers until the moment of action, rolling up on a dirt road, firing, and then disappearing before anyone on the other end of the radar can react. The phrase launch and scoot may sound flippant, but it captures the essence of modern survivability in Ukraine's war. Hit hard, move fast, and do not give the enemy the luxury of a second shot. To understand why Nightfall's launch and scoot doctrine matters, it helps to compare it with the missiles Ukraine already fields and the way they are deployed. The ATACMS are truck-mounted but predictable. The American NGM-140 ATACMS is a truck launched from HIMARS or M270 platforms. It is road mobile, but the launcher itself is a known high-value target. Every time Ukraine fires ATACMS, the Russians immediately start hunting for the telltale HIMARS signature. Once fired, HIMARS crews can displace quickly, but they carry limited reloads and depend on a relatively visible logistics chain. In practice, ATACMS gives Ukraine long reach, but the system itself is not designed to sprint away within minutes like Nightfall. Then there's Storm Shadow and Scalp, air-launched and risky. Britain's Storm Shadow and France's Scalps are fired from Ukrainian Su-24s, which means every strike carries risk to a scarce, aging airframe and its crew. To get into launch range, the aircraft has to approach contested airspace, dodge Russian fighters and SAMs, and then hope to make it back. These missiles are devastating once airborne, but they tie their effectiveness to a vulnerable delivery system. That is the opposite of Nightfall, which keeps human operators out of the danger zone. Nightfall flips that equation. Its doctrine assumes a contested battle space, saturated with drones, saturated with radars, and counter-battery systems. It is engineered to set up, fire, and vanish in the narrow window before Russia's ISR assets respond. Think of it as artillery with the survival instinct. The system does not rely on manned aircraft or immobile launch pads, and unlike HIMARS, it will be optimized to sprint away before the first Lancet is even launched. Okay, when Britain actually transfers Nightfalls to Ukraine, Kyiv will gain a standoff weapon capable of striking well beyond the front lines. With a 600-plus kilometer range, virtually every Russian logistics hub in occupied Ukraine and many inside Russia would be in reach. Bridges across the Kerch Strait, command centers in Crimea, air bases in Rostov, and ammo dumps in Voronezh would all have bullseyes painted on them. Just as Storm Shadow gave Ukraine a precision tool to hammer Black Sea Fleet bases, Nightfall will give Ukraine the ability to pummel Russian infrastructure deeper inland. Russia's safe zones would shrink dramatically. Britain is not pretending this will solve Ukraine's war overnight. Development must finish, integration must follow, and Ukraine's crews must be trained. But symbolically, Nightfall is huge. It signals that NATO is now willing to commit not just existing weapons, but entire future programs to Ukraine's defense. The days of emptying Cold War warehouses for leftovers are gone. Now it's about shaping the next generation of European weaponry with Ukraine's battlefield as the testing ground. And Ukraine benefits greatly. For Moscow, the arrival of Nightfall would be yet another nightmare in the long list. First, they were terrified of HIMARS, then Storm Shadow, then ATACMS. Now Britain is preparing to give Ukraine a missile that combines precision, survivability, and affordability all in one package. When the UK delivers, Ukraine will not just inherit another Western toy. It will inherit a weapon designed from day one to operate in a war just like this one. And for Russia still flailing to defend against drones built in Ukrainian garages, the idea of facing mass-produced stealth ballistic missiles should keep the Kremlin awake at night. That's it for today, friends. Subscribing is the best way to keep me off OnlyFans. Trust me, don't nobody want to see that. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.